We do have some time for some questions. If there's any questions from the participants for any of the presenters, we have a couple of minutes to stack those. And you can put that in the chat. We'll just give you a couple minutes to present those if you'd like. And while we're waiting for some questions, I do have a question for some of our panelists. How do you think, when you hear that people are viewing buyers and traffickers as more like a victimless crime, as somebody that we should decriminalize and protect, what do you think the impact is going to be on particularly those most impacted by the commercial sex trade and human trafficking? You're included too, you can answer.
That's a really good question. When we look at society's most vulnerable, and oftentimes multi-generational, and exploitation is often, exploitation is often generational. How do we break that? I can tell you that by decriminalizing buyers and traffickers, that is not going to break any of those generational impacts. And we need options. We do. We need opportunities. If there's employers that are out there that are listening, you know, we need to have options. How can you help somebody, you know, leave a life of exploitation when you're not able to sustain yourself in a way that you can support yourself or your children? And so we really need to build opportunities. And it doesn't matter if it's in Cameroon or if it's here in the United States, we all need to have options. And I really, you know, appreciate everything that everybody has said today. And there's no way that decriminalizing buyers and managers, traffickers, is going to make it better.
A question from the audience. Why do trafficking survivors, run so often? This is coming from a social worker, and just expressing that when there's a safe placement from the state, there's often a report of them running away or refusing to accept the safe placement. And specifically, what are some of the reasons why survivors might run away or refuse that placement? And what can Jill do, that person do to gain their trust and build their trust? Kira or Francesca? Or both?
I'm gonna hop in here really quick. My experience with working with youth in the foster care system, we can't really denounce the value of one survivor helping and mentoring another survivor. There's something magical that happens within that relationship. It's really hard as a social worker or an advocate to be able to show up whenever these kids reappear. Right? I had youth that were in foster care for years and years and years that experienced exploitation and all of these things. When it's normal for you to be on the streets and you've got a family on the streets that is down for you no matter what, and then you go into these placements and you blow out of them real quick, the structure of placements is not conducive to the healing of survivors, because we're used to making decisions. Like, so many of my clients would say things like, I'm not allowed to smoke, and I smoke cigarettes and stuff like that. And so the prioritization of the services is, and the stipulations that placements have on survivors is incredibly unhelpful. In fact, it drives us back to the streets when there's too many judgments or too many expectations put on us. And so the relationship is the most important thing. Showing up when you say you're going to show up, doing what you say you're going to do. If they hit you up and they say, I'm hungry, I need clothes, I need to go to the doctors, whatever it looks like, that's how you build the relationship. You suit up and you show up when you say you will. And one thing that I've found is really helpful is like when my kids would blow out of placement and they'd be on the run for months, I'd have contact with them either on their Facebook or their phone, but most of the time it's a Wi-Fi phone, but I would just message them and be like, I'm thinking about you. Let me know if you need anything. I'm here if you need anything. And that's it. No expectations on the relationship, because the expectations are things that create like this dynamic that's unhelpful between youth that are currently in foster care and youth that are like in social workers. So when they're on the run, they don't trust anybody. They're scared that they're going to be taken to juvie, because that's typically what happens, is status offense stuff. And it's not helpful. In fact, it's further traumatization stacked upon already a lot of trauma. So I don't know if that's necessarily helpful, but remember always the relationship is the most important thing.
Absolutely. And if I can briefly add to that, Kira, that's okay. Thank you. From the boys and men side and LGBTQ side of that, there's not systems set up to serve. And without those systems set up to serve, what are we going to refer people to? It's a fraction of what they need or deserve, right? Like I really fully believe, particularly our children, youth, and all survivors of exploitation deserve access to autonomy and self-affirming lives. You know, how many times I've taken a client in for services, the closest thing we can find is DV services, and the representative telling the survivor that they are the perpetrator of the crime. And it's just total systems failure. So we have to really be mindful. And I think one ways we can gain trust, to respond with a question, is that to understand and to exhibit that understanding of what you're asking that person to go through, down to like, this is what's going to happen when you arrive. You're going to have to check your bag. You're going to have to bring only this amount. Like, what is their experience of it? This is the bus you're going to ride. This is the, down to the T, what is your experience of it? And I think that really shows compassion, understanding, and some degree of empathy as well.
Excellent.
Francesca, I think you were saying something.
Yeah, I wanted to chip into the question, why do trafficked victims run so often? Actually, Eric, to the based on what we've been communicating, I don't think we have a safe placement home here that I've known, to the best of my knowledge. But despite the fact that we don't have, I use my home as a temporary safe home. And when you try to get a survival sister in, they always like, they are not confident. They feel like they are not wanting, you give them all the love, but in less than 1, 2, 3 days, some might stay for like 1 to 3 weeks, and they now get a relative they can go and squat with. But some that you're willing for them to stay long, they just get up and decide that they are leaving. So I don't know if maybe seeing what I'm doing, some of them feel the unbalance that I've become a different person. I'm no longer that survivor. It's like that disparity for them to really be close to me. And some of them see me as, when you go close to Francisca, you stand a chance to share your story. And some of them are so reserved that they die inwardly. They are dying because they are so shy to share what they have experienced. And they know that maybe Francisca will urge me to say it out. So it's really somehow difficult to really bring them close to you and to gain that trust. I don't know why. We all have been through the same ordeal. We all are fine, we are rescued, but I don't know, this gap is still there. But I'm struggling my own little way to bridge that gap.
Thank you, Francesca. It's very powerful.
I wanted to add something really quickly, and I want to be mindful of time, so this is going to be real quick. you have to understand trauma bonding, and you have to understand the impact of trauma itself. And when you look statistically, and I've been doing this work for over 20 years, I would say 90% of the individuals that I worked with had a trauma background that had never been addressed. And you know, often self-medicate, and there's a lot of different things in there, but traffickers are famous within the recruitment and the grooming and the breaking process to remove all other source of need fulfillment. So they become 100% dependent on them. And this is a very strong bond. And we would love to be invited back for all of us on the panel to just dig deeper into that. But we have one more question, and it's a really good question. So I'm going to leave it at that, and thank you.
One more question, briefly going over for a minute, understand that people have to leave. The question that we have is, how do gentlemen's clubs, strip clubs, influence this issue when a Portland, Oregon's claim to fame is having the most strip clubs per capita in the US?
So number one problem there is calling them gentlemen's clubs. I've never met a single gentleman in a strip club. So number two with that is, again, it normalizes the commodification of people's bodies, because like talked about throughout like this entire presentation, really, like, we're talking about people who are not building relationships and situations based upon mutuality, autonomy, and consent. And so the thing that happens within like a variety of, like, all of the sex trades really, is that consent is commodified. And so you are paying for the illusion of consent. So that's how it influences it, normalizes it. And, you know, prostitution is unfortunately something that tends to inherently happen within strip clubs.
That really speaks to me, Kira. You know, I think about when gay men first started to see themselves in media. It was in these adult bookstores in gay pornography, right? And that's when we started to see representation to some degree. And it was all inherent to the commercial sex industry. And so when we have, I think, like, when we talk about LGBTQIA+, inclusion and equity within response to commercial sex exploitation, we have to, again, keep in mind, just like with Indigenous people, the history behind where we've been and where we are now. These things overlay, these things get complicated, and that impact of having an integrated part of the commercial sex industry in your community is going to be felt.
Yeah. Really quickly, I wanted to add, do a Google search around strip clubs and trafficking. There's numerous reports that are out there, and I know, because, you know, I'm a survivor, I've worked in strip clubs before, a majority of the individuals in there have pimps and they have traffickers. And also pornography. You have to look at pornography. Often traffickers force their victims to film pornography so that they can hold it as a tool to blackmail. And also webcamming. You know, so it may, like Kira said, have the illusion of looking like there is consent. And even if they don't have a trafficker, there's always these power dynamics of the manager in the club. And to me, the manager in the club is a trafficker because you are paying them, but that is an entire different series. But inherently, strip clubs, pornography, webcamming, you know, any form of the commercial sex trade has a high percentage and direct link to trafficking.
I want to give thanks to all the panelists and to everyone who's attended today. If you have any last thoughts, now is a good time. If not, we thank you and we really look forward to continued collaboration. Bye, everyone.